Humanity's decision to leave the Galactic Council was not made lightly. For years, humans have been a vital part of the Council, a force for peace and diplomacy in a galaxy that often seemed on the brink of chaos. They had played a critical role in keeping the balance, mediating between alien species, and ensuring that the fragile peace endured. But over time, humanity had begun to feel the strain of this responsibility. It was no longer just about peace. It was about surviving in a galaxy where power struggles, secret alliances, and political corruption threatened to consume everything. In the corridors of power on Earth, a heavy silence had fallen over the leaders as they gathered to make the decision. The war rooms were filled with the hum of machinery, the clicking of keyboards, and the low murmur of discussions. It was a difficult decision, one that would affect not just Earth but the entire galaxy. The leaders knew that by leaving the Council, humanity would be isolating itself. They would be stepping away from the protective network that the Council provided, and yet they were determined to chart their own course. The leader of the human delegation, a woman with sharp eyes and a determined expression, stood before the Council members, her mind heavy with the weight of the decision. Her voice was steady as she spoke. "We have tried to bring peace, to mediate between the factions, and ensure that no one race becomes too powerful. But the Council is failing. The endless political games, the corruption. It's not a system that can work anymore." She paused, looking around the room. Her words hit harder than any weapon ever could. The Council members sat in silence, their faces reflecting the conflict they felt. They knew she was right. They all did. After moments of tense quiet, another voice spoke, a man with a grave expression. "You're saying we abandon everything. The treaties, the alliances, everything." He couldn't hide the fear in his voice. The very idea of breaking away from the Galactic Council seemed like a suicide mission, especially when humanity had worked so hard to gain its position of influence in the galaxy. But the woman's answer was firm. "Yes, we have to create our own future. If we stay, we will be forced to play by rules that no longer serve us. We must break free." Her words echoed through the room, stirring a quiet ripple of agreement, but also a deep sense of dread. Earth had always been an independent planet, but that independence had been tempered by the web of relationships the Council had formed with other species. To leave the Council would mean cutting off all those connections, all the political support, and perhaps most importantly, the protection the Council offered. As the leaders made their final preparations, their eyes turned to the stars. Humanity had already begun to make moves. Ships were being mobilized, fleets were being organized, and the plans were already in motion. The decision had been made. Humanity would leave the Council, regardless of the consequences. No more waiting in the shadows, trying to appease the powerful alien factions. No more pretending to be part of a system that was broken beyond repair. As the news spread across the galaxy, shockwaves rippled through every corner. The members of the Galactic Council, who had always assumed humanity would remain a loyal ally, were blindsided. The first message from Earth, a calm but resolute announcement, spread like wildfire. The moment they heard it, the leaders of the alien races paused in disbelief. The Zorak, the telepathic rulers, had long seen humanity as a useful ally, someone who helped maintain balance. Now they saw their influence fading. They immediately began to formulate plans to keep the other species in line, sensing an opportunity to seize more power in the vacuum that humanity's absence would leave. The Shalak, the fierce warriors known for their strength and brutal tactics, were quick to react. They had always believed that power came from war, not diplomacy. They saw humanity's departure as a challenge, a weakening of the Council's authority. With no one left to balance their growing strength, they began to prepare for open conflict. To the Shalak, this was a time for action, not words. They would not wait for the Council to crumble further. They would act now, taking what they wanted, and no one would stand in their way. The Vorgan, a race of intellectuals and philosophers, reacted with a mix of confusion and dread. To them, the Council was more than just a political body. It was the foundation of the galaxy's order. Without it, they feared chaos would reign. They were not warriors like the Shellac, nor manipulators like the Zorak. They were thinkers, strategists. They scrambled to understand the deeper meaning of humanity's departure. Was it a sign of a new era, or a warning of something far more dangerous on the horizon? The Vorkan leaders convened in secret, trying to devise a plan that would restore balance before the galaxy fell apart entirely. And then there were the smaller races, those who had always relied on the strength of the Council to protect them. They were left in the middle, caught between fear and uncertainty. Without humanity's stabilizing influence, they feared the Zorak and Shellac would become too powerful, forcing them into submission. They didn't know what to think. Should they side with one of the larger factions, or should they try to form new alliances in the hope of maintaining some level of peace? Back on Earth, as the final ships left the Galactic Council's headquarters, there was a sense of finality. The planet was no longer just a part of a larger political body. Humanity had taken its fate into its own hands, but the weight of that decision was heavy. Earth's leaders knew the road ahead would not be easy. They had rejected the Council's way of life, but now they had to face the unknown. Would humanity thrive as an independent force, free to shape its own future? Or would the galaxy's rising tensions drag them into an inevitable war? As Earth's ships disappeared into the depths of space, the voice of the leader who had made the call echoed one last time in the minds of those who heard it. We have made our choice. The future is ours to shape, but the galaxy has just begun to notice the consequences of our departure. In the vast, cold expanse of space, humanity's fate was no longer in the hands of the Galactic Council. It was now in their own. And as they sailed into the unknown, the fear that gripped the rest of the galaxy began to take shape. The Council was no longer united. The balance of power was shifting, and the universe would soon learn that the moment humanity walked away, everything began to change. As humanity's ships moved farther from the Galactic Council, the shockwaves of their departure rippled across the galaxy. The leaders of the other species had been stunned, some of them in disbelief, others filled with immediate panic. They had been so certain that humanity, with its history of diplomacy and peacekeeping, would never abandon the structure that had brought stability to the galaxy. But now, that was all gone. The Council was shattered, and the future seemed more uncertain than ever. The Zorak, a species known for their calm and telepathic abilities, were the first to react. They had always seen humanity as a stabilizing force, someone who could balance their own ambitions and help keep the galaxy in check. The Zorak had often played the role of the quiet manipulators, carefully weaving their influence behind the scenes, making allies, and ensuring their own dominance through subtle means. But now, with humanity gone, they saw an opening. The power vacuum left by humanity's departure was immense. The Zorak saw it as a chance to reassert their dominance and reshape the galaxy to fit their vision of order. We must not allow this chaos to spread, the leader of the Zorak Council stated, his voice low but commanding. Humanity may have left, but they've shown us what happens when the foundations crumble. We will restore the balance, not for peace, but for control. With their psychic abilities, the Zorak could read the minds of weaker species, manipulate emotions, and extract information without a single word spoken. They began their campaign to control the smaller races, using fear and promises of protection to bring them under their influence. Their spies moved swiftly, spreading rumors of the coming storm, whispering of the disaster that was waiting to tear the galaxy apart. The Zorak were masterful in their manipulation, turning the fear of the unknown into a tool for their conquest. Meanwhile, the Shellac were preparing for a very different kind of response. Unlike the Zorak, who preferred subtlety, the Shellac were a warrior race. Their culture was built on strength, dominance, and conquest. When they heard of humanity's departure, they didn't see an opportunity for control. They saw a threat to their ambitions. The Galactic Council had always been an obstacle, a barrier to their true power. But with humanity gone, the Shellac saw their chance to assert their will on the galaxy without interference. The Shalak were already known for their ruthless tactics and their massive fleet of warships. They were the most militaristic species in the galaxy, and with the Council in disarray, they were ready to seize what they had always believed was rightfully theirs. "I told you," one of their generals said as he watched the reports of humanity's departure unfold on a holoscreen. "The Council was weak. It was only a matter of time before they fell. Now we take what's ours." They began to mobilize their fleets, moving their warships into key sectors. Their target: the weaker, unprotected worlds that had relied on the Council's protection. As the Shalak began their conquests, they sent a message to the galaxy. Power would be decided through strength, not diplomacy. The universe, they believed, would only understand the language of force. The Vorgan, on the other hand, were taking a more calculated approach. The Vorgan were a race of intellectuals, known for their philosophical and logical approach to conflict. They had always believed in reason and knowledge as the foundation of galactic peace, and they had long been uneasy with the power struggles that were constantly brewing under the surface of the Galactic Council. When humanity left, the Vorgan leaders gathered in private meetings to discuss the potential fallout. Some among the Vorgan saw humanity's decision as a sign of an impending collapse, not just of the Council, but of galactic stability itself. The Vorgan's fear was not of war or conquest, it was of what might come next. They saw themselves as the intellectual guardians of the galaxy, believing that without the Council to provide order, the galaxy could descend into chaos. But even as they made plans to protect the galaxy from this chaos, they too were divided. "We must seek to restore the Council," a senior Vorgan leader argued. "If we allow the galaxy to fall into anarchy, then we risk everything we've worked for." Others, however, were more cautious. "The galaxy is changing," one of them said. "Perhaps it is time for us to rethink the Council's purpose. The moment humanity left, everything shifted. We must learn to adapt." For the smaller races that had relied on the Council for stability, the situation was even more dire. These races had no power of their own to protect themselves against the rising tide of aggression. They were caught between the growing power of the Zorak and the Shalak, both of whom sought to impose their own vision of the galaxy. The smaller races had no choice but to scramble, desperately trying to form alliances where they could. "Do we align with the Zorak?" one of their leaders asked. "They promise us safety, but we know what they want: control. Or do we side with the Shalak, knowing that their warships will sweep over us like a storm?" Neither choice is easy. As the galaxy grew more divided, the fear that had once been whispered in dark corners now began to spread openly. The balance of power that humanity had helped maintain for so long was crumbling, and the question on everyone's mind was simple: what would come next? Back on Earth, humanity was watching the chaos unfold from afar. They had made their decision, and they had accepted the consequences. But even as they moved farther from the Galactic Council's shadow, they couldn't shake the feeling that something much darker was at play. The galaxy was spiraling into chaos, but was it just the result of their departure, or was something far worse, something far older, beginning to stir in the depths of space? It was a question that would linger in the minds of every leader, every species, and every individual who saw the sudden unraveling of the galactic order. No one could say for sure what would happen next, but one thing was clear: the moment humanity walked away, the universe began to change forever. And whatever came next, no one was ready for it. The collapse of the Galactic Council didn't just send shockwaves across the galaxy. It set off a chain reaction that no one, not even the most experienced strategists, had seen coming. As each species began to respond to the power vacuum left by humanity's departure, the universe was filled with uncertainty, paranoia, and tension. Every move was now under intense scrutiny, and alliances once thought unbreakable began to fracture. The consequences of humanity's decision to walk away from the Council were only just beginning to unfold, and what was to come would leave no one unscathed. The Zorak, who had once been the silent masters of influence, found themselves at a crossroads. They had long understood the importance of maintaining the delicate balance of power in the galaxy, but now, with humanity gone, the balance was shifting dangerously in their favor. They had already begun making moves to expand their reach. What was once a subtle, careful manipulation of weaker races was now becoming an open game of power and control. The Zorak's telepathic abilities gave them an edge that no other species could match, and they wasted no time using it. Through their vast network of spies and telepathic agents, the Zorak began to spread whispers among the smaller races. They sowed seeds of doubt, spreading fear of the rising Shellac forces, and painting the Shellac as an uncontrollable force that would soon sweep through the galaxy, leaving devastation in their wake. At the same time, the Zorak offered themselves as the galaxy's protectors, promising safety and stability in exchange for loyalty. They knew that in a galaxy full of uncertain leaders, those who were scared would turn to them for guidance. The Zorak were playing a dangerous game, but they were calculating enough to think they could control the outcome. However, not all the smaller races were convinced. The Vorgan, with their deep knowledge and philosophical ideals, were not easily swayed by fear alone. They saw through the Zorak's manipulation, understanding that if the Zorak truly gained power, it would come at a price that no one, not even the Zorak themselves, could predict. The Vorgan were deeply troubled by the events unfolding in the galaxy. They believed in the ideals of peace, knowledge, and reason above all else. But the galaxy they had once known was now slipping into something much darker. The Vorgan, instead of aligning with one of the larger factions, chose to retreat into their own philosophical musings, seeking to understand what had gone wrong and why the galaxy had come to such a perilous point. Yet, even as they tried to maintain their stance as neutral intellectuals, their actions began to have consequences. They started to warn the galaxy of the looming dangers, the dangers that were not necessarily from the Shellac or the Zorak, but from something deeper, something older, that had been awakened by humanity's sudden departure. The Vorgan feared that the dissolution of the Galactic Council might have triggered the awakening of an ancient force, something far beyond the comprehension of any species alive today. Ancient prophecies, long forgotten by most, had spoken of a time when the galaxy would be divided, when the Council would fall, and when a darkness would return to consume all. The Vorgan didn't fully understand these ancient warnings, but they couldn't shake the feeling that the signs were everywhere. They began searching ancient archives, hoping to find some clue as to what this darkness might be. But the more they searched, the more they realized that even they were ill-prepared for what lay ahead. Meanwhile, the Shellac were swiftly moving forward with their plans. To them, the fall of the Galactic Council and the departure of humanity had opened a door they had long been waiting to break through. The Shellac had always viewed the galaxy's power structures as fragile. They believed that power was the only truth, that those who were strong enough to take control of the galaxy would be the ones who deserved to rule it. The Shellac's worldview was one of survival of the fittest. Diplomacy and peace were mere illusions, designed to weaken those who sought real power. And now, with the Galactic Council gone, the Shellac saw their moment. The Shellac warships began their advance into territories once protected by the Council's peacekeepers. Planets that had lived in relative peace under the Council's rule now faced the brutal onslaught of the Shellac military. Cities fell, resources were seized, and resistance was met with swift destruction. The Shellac didn't care for negotiation. They cared only for domination. As their forces spread across the galaxy, more and more systems fell under their iron grip. The Shellac were carving a new order, one where power was absolute and unchallenged. And they made it clear to anyone who opposed them: submit or face annihilation. The smaller races that had once thrived under the Galactic Council's protection were now left to choose sides or face certain doom. Some tried to resist, but they were quickly overwhelmed by the sheer force of the Shellac's might. Others, driven by fear and desperation, turned to the Zorak for protection, believing that they could somehow restore order. The Zorak's promises of safety began to look more and more tempting as the galaxy descended into war. And so, alliances were formed. but they were fragile, built not on trust, but on the fear of the growing shellac threat. As humanity watched from the safety of their isolated space, they began to realize the consequences of their bold decision. They had walked away from the Galactic Council, believing that they could forge a new future, free from the corruption and power struggles of the past. But the galaxy was not as simple as they had hoped. The moment they left, they had unwittingly set off a chain of events that no one could control. The power that had once kept the galaxy stable was now gone, and in its place was a volatile, dangerous void that no one could fill. On Earth, leaders began to wonder if they had made the right choice. They had thought that walking away would give them freedom, but now they saw that freedom came at a price. The galaxy was descending into chaos, and humanity was no longer a part of the structure that had once maintained order. The galaxy's future was uncertain, and humanity now faced the reality of what their actions had set in motion. But there was something even darker looming on the horizon, something that neither the Zorak, nor the Shellac, nor even the Vorgan could comprehend. In the void of space, an ancient entity had been awakened, something that had been waiting for this very moment. And as the galaxy teetered on the edge of destruction, the true nightmare had just begun to stir. The galaxy, once united under the fragile peace of the Galactic Council, was now a battleground of chaos and uncertainty. Each species was scrambling to fill the void left by humanity's abrupt departure, but none of them had truly grasped the extent of the consequences. The power struggles, the territorial wars, and the political manipulations had all intensified, but the most dangerous threat was still out of sight, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the galaxy to weaken itself further. The stakes had never been higher, and even the most powerful leaders couldn't predict what was coming. As the Shellac continued their conquest, their brutal assault on weaker planets seemed unstoppable. The sheer force of their warships and their unrelenting drive for power left entire systems in ruins. The smaller races, once protected by the Council's authority, had no choice but to bend the knee or face extinction. Cities were bombed into oblivion, and resistance movements were crushed within days. Entire species were wiped out, their territories absorbed into the growing Shellac Empire. The brutality of the Shellac was undeniable, and yet they were not the only threat to the galaxy's survival. The Zorak, who had long been the masters of manipulation and subterfuge, had also seized upon the chaos. They knew that the galaxy's instability could be their opportunity to solidify their power, but they weren't willing to outright destroy their rivals, not yet. Instead, they adopted a more subtle approach. Using their telepathic abilities, they reached into the minds of weaker leaders, sowing fear and doubt. They offered promises of protection, whispering into the minds of those who were too afraid to stand up to the Shellac. But these promises came at a steep price. To the Zorak, control was everything. And those who accepted their help were bound by an invisible thread of influence that would slowly tighten until there was nothing left of their autonomy. The smaller races had been drawn into this web, each one vying for survival by any means necessary. Some were forced into alliances with the Zorak, others with the Shellac, while a few desperate species attempted to resist both powers. But no one was truly safe. The universe was in a state of constant flux, with shifting allegiances and the ever-present threat of war. Amidst the chaos, the Vorgan, who had once been seen as the intellectual giants of the galaxy, found themselves isolated. Their warnings about the coming darkness had been ignored by most. Few listened to the Vorgan's theories about an ancient, forgotten force that had been awakened by humanity's departure. Some thought it was merely paranoia, while others dismissed it as the ramblings of a group too removed from the realities of power. But the Vorgan weren't wrong. They had sensed something in the very fabric of space, something ancient, something powerful, stirring. In the deep, forgotten corners of the galaxy, beyond the reach of any known species, an ancient entity began to awaken. It was a being from an era long before the rise of the Galactic Council, before the first alliances were formed, before the races of the galaxy knew what peace even meant. This entity was not a physical being, but a force, an energy that existed between the stars. in the very heart of the universe itself. Its presence had been hidden, dormant, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And now, with the Council gone, and the galaxy in disarray, that moment had arrived. The Vorgan had known that something like this might occur, but even they didn't understand the full extent of the threat. As the entity stirred, ripples of energy began to spread throughout the galaxy. Planets trembled, stars flickered as if something were draining their energy, and strange anomalies began to appear in the fabric of space. Ships navigating through the galaxy started to disappear, lost to a force they couldn't even comprehend. Communications between distant planets began to fail, as though the very channels of the galaxy were being shut off one by one. The Zorak, with their unparalleled psychic abilities, were the first to sense the disturbance. They could feel it. Something was pulling at the fabric of the galaxy itself. It was not a physical force, but something far more insidious, something that threatened their control over the galaxy. The Zorak, who had been manipulating others to their advantage, now found themselves facing an unseen enemy they couldn't control. For the first time in a long while, the Zorak felt fear. The Shellac, too, noticed the strange shifts. Their warships, once unstoppable, began to experience malfunctions. Some systems failed inexplicably, and their weapons systems began to glitch. In the midst of their conquests, they were now faced with an unknown threat that was far more dangerous than anything they had encountered. The Shellac were used to fighting battles, but this force was not something they could defeat with strength alone. They were on the edge of something far darker, something they did not understand. And then there was humanity, sitting on the edge of space, cut off from the chaos. At first, they had been content to leave the Galactic Council behind, believing they could forge a better future on their own. But as the universe began to unravel, humanity couldn't ignore the signs. The strange anomalies, the unexplained disappearances, and the sudden failures of their own communication systems began to get harder to ignore. They realized they were no longer separate from the chaos. They were now part of it. Humanity had made its decision to leave, but they had underestimated the depth of the galaxy's interconnectedness. The balance of the universe wasn't just political. It was something deeper, something cosmic. And by walking away, humanity had inadvertently set in motion a sequence of events that no one could control. The galaxy, once held together by the fragile threads of the Galactic Council, was now falling apart. The Shellac were unstoppable in their quest for domination. The Zorak were tightening their grip, and the smaller races were left scrambling to survive. But in the background, something darker was awakening, something that would make all the struggles for power seem insignificant in comparison. Humanity had walked away from the Council, but they hadn't escaped the storm. They were now caught in the very fabric of the galaxy's unraveling. The question that lingered was no longer about who would control the galaxy, but who would survive the coming darkness. As the first signs of this ancient entity's full return began to show, the galaxy stood on the precipice of destruction, and in the heart of it all, the choices of one species, humanity, would prove to be the spark that ignited the end of an era. The universe was about to learn that when the balance is broken, the true chaos begins. The galaxy was in turmoil, its once cohesive structure now fractured beyond repair. With humanity's departure from the Galactic Council, the universe had been plunged into a state of uncertainty and fear. What had once been a carefully orchestrated web of alliances, treaties, and power dynamics was now crumbling under the weight of unchecked ambition, unchecked fear, and the rising shadow of something far more dangerous than anyone had expected. The Zorak, ever the masters of psychological warfare and manipulation, found themselves in an unfamiliar position. The delicate game they had played for centuries, manipulating weaker species, influencing galactic leaders, and maintaining their position of quiet power, was no longer enough. The events that had followed humanity's departure had upset the natural order, creating cracks in the galaxy's fabric that the Zorak could not control. For the first time in centuries, they had begun to feel vulnerable. The Zorak Council, usually calm and composed, now convened in frantic meetings. They had felt the tremors of an unknown power. It was like an unseen force was watching them, pulling at the very energy of the galaxy itself. The psychic network that the Zorak had used to communicate with one another, to infiltrate the minds of other races, had been disrupted. Something was blocking them. And it wasn't just a technological malfunction. It felt almost like a living presence, a cosmic entity with powers far beyond their understanding. The Zorak had always believed themselves to be the ultimate manipulators, the ones who controlled the fate of the galaxy from the shadows. But now, they realized they were no longer the most dangerous force in the universe. They were simply players in a much larger game, one they could no longer predict. Meanwhile, the Shalak had not slowed down their conquests. They had been preparing for this moment for years, and humanity's exit from the Galactic Council had been the signal they had been waiting for. The Shalak had never been a species to shy away from war. Strength was their language, and they saw any conflict as an opportunity to prove their superiority. Now that the Council was in disarray, they saw the galaxy as ripe for the taking. But the deeper they pushed into the galaxy, the more resistance they encountered. Unexpected resistance. It wasn't from other military powers, but from something far more subtle, far more dangerous. The Shalak warships were beginning to malfunction in ways they couldn't explain. Their once formidable fleet was now suffering from unexplained failures. Communications were dropping. Their weapons were misfiring. It was as if something was actively working against them. The Shalak, who had always believed in their military might, were beginning to question whether their conquest of the galaxy was even possible. The signs of cosmic disturbance were growing too strong to ignore, and for the first time in centuries, they hesitated. They had always prided themselves on being warriors, but what they were facing now was not something that could be defeated with a sword or a bomb. In the midst of the chaos, the smaller races, those who had once found peace under the protection of the Galactic Council, were caught in a difficult position. They had no real power to defend themselves, and with the Shalak's armies growing stronger and the Zorak tightening their grip, the future looked grim. Some began to retreat into isolation, cutting themselves off from the rest of the galaxy, hoping to avoid the growing conflict. Others, driven by fear, sought refuge in the promises of the Zorak, believing that their mind manipulation and subtle influence could shield them from the chaos. But the Zorak's protection came at a cost that the smaller races had not fully understood until it was too late. The Zorak did not offer safety for free. They demanded loyalty, complete and unquestionable loyalty. And those who gave in found themselves bound by invisible threads, unable to break free from the Zorak's growing power. At the same time, the Vorgan, who had once been the intellectual pillars of the galaxy, found themselves increasingly isolated. Their warnings about an ancient force rising from the depths of space were dismissed as paranoia by many, but they could feel it. This darkness, this presence that was growing stronger with each passing day. The Vorgan had once believed that knowledge and reason could solve any problem, but now they were realizing that even their vast intelligence might not be enough to understand or confront the true enemy. The ancient entity, which had lain dormant for eons, was waking. It had been bound, hidden away by forces far older than the Galactic Council, waiting for the right moment to return. Humanity's departure had been the catalyst, the final piece in the cosmic puzzle. The force was not a physical being, but a presence, a force of entropy and destruction that existed in the very fabric of the universe itself. It was an ancient power that had once shaped the galaxy, and now, with the fall of the Council, it was returning to reclaim what it had lost. The Vorgan were not blind to the growing signs of this ancient awakening. They began to piece together the scattered clues, referencing old prophecies and ancient texts. What they discovered was chilling. The galaxy was on the brink of something catastrophic, something beyond the wars and political struggles that had dominated the past centuries. The ancient entity, once a force of creation, had become a force of destruction. It would unravel everything, undoing all the progress that had been made since the rise of the first galactic civilizations. But the Vorgan were too late. The entity's power was already beginning to bleed through, and with every passing day, the galaxy grew more unstable. Stars flickered out. Time and space itself seemed to warp and twist. Ships that ventured too far from the galactic core began to vanish without a trace. Entire systems were suddenly cut off from the rest of the galaxy, their communications lost forever. The energy of the universe itself seemed to be draining, and no one could stop it. The question now was not about who would rule the galaxy. It was about whether there would be a galaxy left to rule. Humanity, watching from afar, had begun to realize the full scope of the chaos they had unwittingly set in motion. They had thought that by leaving the Galactic Council, they could carve out their own destiny, free from the corruption and infighting of the political system. But now, they could see that their decision had been the spark that set the galaxy on a path to destruction. It was not just the Shalak, nor the Zorak, nor the Vorgan that posed the greatest threat to the universe. It was the ancient, unknowable force that had been awakened by their departure. The galaxy was no longer a political battlefield. It was a dying star, caught in the grip of an unstoppable cosmic entropy. And as the entity's influence spread, it became clear that no one, not even humanity, could escape its reach. The galaxy's future was now in question. The ancient force was returning, and with it, the end of an era. The struggle for survival was no longer about diplomacy, power, or military might. It was about whether anyone would survive the coming storm. The moment humanity had walked away, they had unknowingly set the universe on a path toward its own extinction. And no one, not even the most powerful forces in the galaxy, knew how to stop it. The galaxy was rapidly spiraling into chaos, and the galaxy's core was on the brink of collapse. The once powerful Galactic Council had been shattered by humanity's abrupt withdrawal, and with each passing day, the vacuum left in its wake deepened. The Shalak, Zorak, and countless other factions were fighting for dominance, but none of them understood that they were merely pawns in a far larger game. The real danger was not from within the galaxy. It was something that existed beyond the stars, in the very fabric of the universe itself. The Zorak, those who had once prided themselves on their ability to control the minds of others, now found themselves gripped by fear. They had always thought of themselves as the ultimate manipulators, the unseen masters of the galaxy. But now, the entity that had been awakened, something far older and more powerful than any of them had ever imagined, was threatening to undo everything they had built. Their psychic networks, once a tool of great power, now seemed like nothing more than fragile threads against a raging storm. Even the Zorak couldn't deny the feeling that something was hunting them, something that knew their every move before they made it. For the first time in centuries, the Zorak were no longer in control. Their influence, their telepathic powers, everything they had relied upon for so long, was now being pulled apart by an unseen force, one that they could neither see nor fully comprehend. The Shalak, too, were beginning to feel the strain. Their military forces, which had once been unstoppable, now faced unexpected setbacks. The anomalies that had plagued the galaxy were becoming more intense, causing systems to malfunction, rendering their ships vulnerable. Entire fleets had vanished without a trace, swallowed by the very fabric of space itself. The Shalak had always believed that strength was the key to domination, but they were learning that strength alone would not be enough to defeat the growing darkness. For the Shalak, the realization came too late. They had advanced too far, and now they were finding themselves caught in a deadly race against time. Their military campaigns were no longer progressing as smoothly as they had planned. Planets that were once easily conquered were now becoming fortresses of resistance, bolstered by the strange energy emanating from the galaxy's core. The Shalak couldn't explain it, but it was clear. Something was alive in the heart of the galaxy, and it was not afraid to show itself. The smaller races, once dependent on the protection of the Galactic Council, now found themselves with no one to turn to. They had been caught between two great powers, the Shalak and the Zorak, and neither seemed willing to offer anything more than control. The idea of a neutral zone, of a place where peace could exist, was rapidly fading. No one was safe anymore, not from the Shalak's unrelenting conquests, nor from the subtle, all-encompassing influence of the Zorak. And yet, amid the endless struggle for power, something else began to stir. In the quietest corners of the galaxy, the Vorgan, who had long considered themselves the galaxy's philosophers and intellectuals, began to see the truth of the ancient prophecies they had studied. The Vorgan had always believed that knowledge would be their shield, that wisdom could solve any crisis, but they were now beginning to realize that knowledge alone would not save them from what was coming. The galaxy was not simply facing a political crisis, it was facing a cosmic one. The Vorgan had always felt a deep connection to the very energy of the galaxy, and they began to notice subtle, but terrifying, shifts in the fabric of space. Entire systems were being wiped from existence, their energies drained into nothingness. Planets that had once thrived with life were now cold, dead husks, their life force drained by an unseen hand. The Vorgan knew that this was no ordinary force. It was something far older, something that had been waiting for this very moment to return. As the Vorgan delved deeper into their studies, they uncovered the truth. The ancient force that was awakening was not just a creature, nor was it some forgotten relic of an ancient civilization. It was a living, breathing entity that existed beyond the stars, a force of nature, a cosmic entity that controlled the very energy of the universe. This force had once been bound, imprisoned by ancient civilizations, long before the rise of the Galactic Council. But now, with the galaxy in disarray, it had begun to break free. The Vorgan had found the warnings, hidden in the ruins of forgotten temples, in the ancient texts that no one had bothered to study in centuries. But it was too late. The awakening of this ancient entity was inevitable. Humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Council had triggered the entity's return. The galaxy was no longer just on the brink of war. It was on the edge of something far worse. It was a return to the chaos that had once consumed the universe, an end to the era of civilization, an undoing of everything that had been built. The Vorgan's last-ditch effort to warn the galaxy came too late. The ancient entity, whose name had been forgotten by all, began to extend its influence. Entire star systems began to fall silent, their energy drained by the unseen force. The anomalies, once small and barely noticeable, were now growing larger, more destructive. Ships, planets, and entire fleets were disappearing, swallowed by the force. Even the most advanced technologies, the weapons and shields that had once been the galaxy's defense, were no match for the cosmic power that was now spreading. The Zorak, who had once believed themselves to be invincible, now found themselves at the mercy of the very entity they had underestimated. Their telepathic powers, once their greatest weapon, were now useless. They could no longer control the minds of others, no longer manipulate the threads of the galaxy. The entity had severed their influence, and the Zorak were left vulnerable, their once great empire now falling apart. The Shalak, too, were beginning to lose their grip. The entity's energy was draining the strength from their warships, causing them to break down, to vanish. Their unstoppable fleets were now becoming sitting targets, helpless in the face of an enemy they couldn't even see. As the galaxy continued to unravel, humanity watched, helpless, from their isolated space. They had thought they were free. Free from the corruption, the bureaucracy, the politics of the Galactic Council. But now, as they saw the collapse of the galaxy around them, they realized the truth. Their departure had set the galaxy on a path to destruction. The very moment they had chosen to walk away from the Council, they had unknowingly triggered the return of something far worse than anything they had ever faced. The galaxy's fate was no longer in the hands of its leaders, its warriors, or its philosophers. It was in the hands of the ancient entity that was now awakening, an entity whose power could not be stopped, whose hunger could not be satisfied. The universe, once so full of life and potential, was now on the edge of oblivion. And as the final moments of the galaxy's existence approached, the galaxy's inhabitants, human and alien alike, realized the truth. The universe wasn't just in danger of being destroyed. It was in danger of being completely erased, wiped from existence by an ancient force that had waited patiently for this very moment. And no one, not even humanity, could stop it.